Um, Quick word of introduction, just explain a little bit about myself and my background. Immediately prior to Central and Eastern European countries becoming part of the EU in 2004, my wife and I had spent 9 years as Salvation Army church leaders in the Czech Republic. Then in the past 22 years living in the UK, we were ministering primarily with Czech and Slovak Roma migrant workers and their families. To say European Roma is not at all to describe a homogenous group. It's a very diverse group. But most of what I'm going to say today would apply to Roma from any Central or Eastern European country, because I've been asked to speak about chaplaincy or ministry to the second generation. Within that first generation, those people who've migrated to the UK from around about 1995 through to 1916, many of them would have been primarily non-English speaking people who migrated primarily for work or to secure access to education for their children. Their home languages would have been, in my case, Czech, Slovak, or the Romani language. And the Romanist language has many dialects depending on which country the people have come from, and indeed which Roma group they've been part of. And because of that, particularly because of that language and also because of that ethnicity, quite a number of congregations have emerged that are specific within that one community, many of them independent, many of them also, as was mentioned by our first speaker, part of the Light and Life movement. And language could still be a barrier to effective chaplaincy to that generation. If I give you an example of that, many of those people have not been taught English. I remember when we started teaching English, we could let them in for a couple of lessons, but as soon as they knew how to explain their name, date of birth, and national insurance number, they got jobs, and so they didn't come to English classes anymore. And that was very much the situation at that time. If you've been brought up or you've learned English on the job, for example, if your job is as an Amazon van driver, the word deliver does not mean the same as Christians might think of in Exodus. It doesn't mean being rescued from slavery. And then if you get a message from your boss that says, save number 108, that actually means don't deliver it. Whereas in a Christian context, we would say save and deliver are linked together and they mean the same thing. So their understanding of English is very contextual. It's about what they needed to know in order to live, and it doesn't necessarily work in a church situation. However, the children who've been brought up in this country, whether or not they were born here, or whether they're what I've recently learned are called 1.5 generation kids, born elsewhere but brought up in this country. It's quite a fluid term, that one. Their home language may well have been Czech or Slovak. It may have been a Romani dialect, together with some loan words from the country of their most recent residence. But those children have been educated in the UK. And for many of them, that is their language that they're most familiar with. At least it's the one that they have the widest vocabulary for. That does not mean, however, that they are bilingual. Very often, these are people who have two vocabularies, but they don't actually know what one particular word means in their different language. They've been educated in say, geography. They know geography terms in English, but they don't know the corresponding term in a different language. So they can't actually translate, but they function within a number of different communities. They often don't read the language of their parents because they've never been taught to read that language. It means that very often they're not comfortable reading a Bible in the same language that their parents read it in. Um, and that generation now includes children who are in education, children who are in higher education, adults who are in employment. And language is an important part of culture, but culture is much wider than just language. Education influences worldview, it influences values, but so does family. So does the background of your extended family. And one of the things that um, anthropologists are now picking up on is the fact that whereas in classic anthropology, you might go and study a particular community in a particular location, the whole world has become much more global. In
That's
other
very
words,
true.
what is local is influenced by what is happening on a global scale. We know what's happening in other parts of the country, of the world, and we relate to those things. That's a generation that very often has a good understanding of English, but has an extended network of contacts with family in different places. I'm aware of people who, in their journey from 2000 onwards, they're now settled in the UK, but in that journey, they've lived in Slovakia and worked in Germany and worked in Belgium and have now come to the UK. And they still have family in all of those countries. Um, in the church, those second generation Roma often have, I said about deliver and save being contextual, having contextual understanding. Very often, the second generation have that same issue in reverse within the churches that their parents have been attending. They are very often they really relate to the Roma worship style. They want to stay in the same church as their parents because extended family relations are very important to them. But they have a limited understanding of some of the things that are being preached. If it's in the in Slovak, if it's in or even if it's in Romany. Um, they have also a greater awareness of cultural diversity than their parents. For many of them, their parents lived in a very black binary world. There's blacks and whites. They would often consider themselves as blacks and the Czech people are whites. And it became very binary. There was just the one minority within that country. Their children have been to often very multicultural schools. They have a much more diverse friendship group. Many of them have friends outside of the Roma community. And that also influences some of the pastoral and chaplaincy needs that they have because they're living between these worlds. But it's not quite living between the worlds. It's that they are adaptable and they can fit in very easily into one world and they can fit in very easily into another world. But they don't want to compartmentalize their lives. They just want to be themselves. That second generation can be very articulate in English, but they retain a very strong cultural identity as Roma, and they have a quite unpredictably varied world view. I cannot say this is how they are. They are each going to be the product of the different experiences that they have had in life. So chaplaincy to that second generation or to that one and a half generation is chaplaincy to a generation, and I'm speaking particularly of the Christians within that generation, a generation that's pioneering access to higher education that their parents never had. They are pioneering the idea of education increasing work prospects because their parents did not have access to a free labour market. They're pioneering the idea of women working or of women with higher earning capacities than their husbands. And these are real issues that they struggle with and appreciate advice about. They have friendship groups beyond the Roma community, and Roma communities in Europe are often very, very closed and insular communities. And yet these children have been to school for many, many years with non-Roma friends. They are battling between individualistic and collective values. And they also have, in many cases, an intentionality about bringing their non-Czech, non-Slovak, often non-Roma friends into relationship with Jesus and the church. And this is also where chaplaincy faces an issue. Because if you are, I know people who are very effective. They will talk to different people in English. They will then talk to somebody else in Slovak. They will then talk to somebody else in Romani. And in terms of that, that centers on that one person who can speak to all of them. When the church gathers together, the people can't actually speak to each other. It's only the chaplain who has that language. That's an issue that we're facing in some of our congregations, but it's also an issue that highlights the significant role of chaplaincy.